Unit 3, page 6, mitosis. So on the left is a picture of mitosis, which is a process. What I'd like for you to do right now is answer the 3 catalyst questions on your handout. The first question, what is reproduction? So you might have a different definition for this, but basically reproduction is creating new copies of an organism. This could be anything as small as a single-celled bacterium to as complex as a human being. Number 2, what's the purpose of reproduction? So in nature, the purpose of reproduction is simply to pass on genes, to make sure that the next generation of offspring have the traits of the parent. Number 3, what are chromosomes? Chromosomes exist inside the nucleus of a cell. These are where all of the genetic information, or the DNA, which is a nucleic acid, is stored for each cell in that organism. Remember that DNA are the instructions to determine what that organism does. Cell reproduction. So today we're going to talk about one process called mitosis. And this is basically how one cell can reproduce itself to create more copies. It results in 2 daughter cells. So we usually call the first cell that we start with a parent cell, and it creates 2 identical copies known as daughter cells. Notice in this picture, you start with 1 cell, and slowly it starts dividing, and at the end you end up with 2 cells there. There are a few other things described. Notice you have 6 pictures here, but the 4 main phases of mitosis are prophase, in this image, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Notice that there's early telophase and late telophase. Some people remember this by thinking P-M-A-T, PMAT. You won't necessarily need to know the different phases for your regions, but it might be important to understand what it looks like. So why do cells divide in the first place? You see a picture of an amoeba up here that's starting to split into another cell. Well, one-cell organisms need to do this in order to reproduce, to make a new copy of themselves and continue the genetics of that parent cell. Asexual reproduction is when you make clones of yourself. So all single-celled organisms are essentially cloning themselves every time they reproduce. Multicellular organisms use mitosis, or cell division, for growth and development. When we go from a fertilized egg at the very beginning of our life all the way to an adult with trillions of cells, we need to go through this process known as mitosis to create new cells. Also, repair and replacement. You see the picture of the starfish on the right. It's regrown a new leg as a form of regeneration. You see the lizard also growing back a tail as a form of regeneration. So it's using this cell division in order to regrow its parts back. Unfortunately, we can't do that, but we can replace cells like our red blood cells that just die normally. Skin cells also die. All of the cells in your body have a certain lifespan. And after that lifespan, you've got to have some backups. So constantly these cells are replicating through this process called mitosis. Sometimes mitosis can go bad though. So sometimes cells reproduce, but it's not necessary that they do. Occasionally those cells take over organs, but they don't do the right job, so they just end up getting in the way and building up. This is called cancer, which I'm sure everyone already knows about. A common cancer is breast cancer, which is what the image on the right is, and you can see something labeled as a tumor. A tumor is a mass of cells that have grown uncontrollably and basically gone through mitosis without stopping. It can damage organs, can result in failure of enzymes working, and you know that enzymes control and regulate a lot of processes in the body, including cellular respiration. So a lot of these things that our body relies on wouldn't work, and that's why people get so sick and sometimes even die. So cancer is malignant growth. Malignant just means it's negative from uncontrolled cell division. So why would cells just make copies? Well, if DNA gets damaged, the cell stops listening to the correct instruction. Remember that the DNA are the instructions for the cell to know what to do. These are called mutations. Some causes of mutations include UV radiation, which is ultraviolet coming from the sun, chemical exposure, radiation exposure, heat, cigarette smoke, pollution, age, and also just genetics. Unfortunately, some of these causes we can't control, but others we can, and they're more environmental factors like cigarette smoking. Cancer is basically a mistake in the cell cycle. Currently, scientists consider cancer to be a result of changes in one or more of the genes that produce substances controlling the cell cycle. So the cell basically has a little timer, a little stopwatch that says, okay, you can grow now. Stop, grow now. Stop, grow now. So when that gets messed up, cancer starts to develop. So that means that these cells just don't know when to stop reproducing, and it causes masses of cells called tumors. You can see the pink part here continues to expand. Occasionally it goes through something called metastasis, which means it gets into the bloodstream and can actually travel to different organs in the body. Here's a quick animation of how cancer looks.
The rate and timing of cell division in your body normally are very precisely regulated. Cells are formed, mature, and eventually die. As this happens, new cells divide, creating replacement cells. Chemical messengers that pass between neighboring cells help keep the rate of cell division equal to the rate of cell death. Sometimes a cell breaks free from its normal restraints and begins to follow its own pattern of cell division. This precancerous cell divides more often than normal, eventually producing a mass of cells that also divide more often. Further changes in these cells can increase the frequency of cell division even more until eventually a cancerous tumor develops. At this point, the tumor grows large but is confined to the tissue where it originated. Late in the development of cancer, some cells may gain the ability to move into blood vessels and travel to other parts of the body. Once established in new locations, these cells continue to divide in an uncontrolled fashion, eventually producing new tumors.
So clearly cancer is something that's very dangerous and is caused by uncontrolled cell division, or mitosis. Now let's take a second and review mitosis in an animation. So here's an animation of what mitosis should look like. Remember, this is different from what we just saw, which was cancer. If we click on the cell, notice what's starting to happen. So we start to see the chromosomes, these little X-like structures in the middle, start to line up. You also see something called spindle fibers across the cell. Notice that the chromosomes separated, so they each have half of the information, but it's a copy. So these two are the same, and these two are the same, resulting in two identical daughter cells. Notice how they split at the very end and create a copy. So now that we've gone over mitosis and cancer, let's do a few summary questions to make sure you were paying attention. Use the picture on the right for help. Question number 1. In the process of mitosis, how many parent cells are there? 1 parent cell. Question 2. In the process of mitosis, how many daughter cells are created? Remember to look at the bottom of the picture. You should have said 2 daughter cells. Question 3. How do the daughter cells compare genetically to the parent cell? Hopefully you remember that they need to be genetically identical. Remember, the whole point of mitosis is to make an identical copy of the genetics or the DNA from the parent cell. And question 4, what is uncontrolled cell division called? Hopefully you remember that that's called cancer. If you had trouble with any of those summary questions, I suggest going back and reviewing.